Reclaiming Catholic Intimacy, formerly Charting Toward Intimacy, covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised.
My husband always wants sex, and I really just don't. He wants me to want sex more. I don't really understand what's going on. How do we fix this? Today, we are going to be talking about what to do when you have mismatched desires. Welcome to Reclaiming Catholic Intimacy, the podcast for Catholic women that helps you improve your sex life, strengthen your marriage, and embrace God's design for love. My name is Ellen Holloway, and let's talk about mismatched desires. This is so common, ladies. It is so common to not want as much sex as your spouse does, right? So it's common if you want sex more than your husband, or it's common if your husband wants sex more than you. Like, just think about it. It is extremely unlikely that two people would want exactly the same amount of sex. So, what do we do when we have this discrepancy in the amount of sex that we want and this discrepancy in desire, this mismatched libido? First off, we need to recognize that part of this might just be because we don't understand responsive and spontaneous desire. And if those two words, you don't know what I mean by that, go back just a couple of episodes. I have an episode on how to figure out if you are spontaneous or responsive desire. That is going to solve a lot of problems. But let's go one further. Let's say we know what desire type we have, and yet we still have this huge discrepancy in want for sex. The reason that you probably don't want sex as much as you want sex is because desire for sex is motivated by reward. Like, the desire for sex is a reward system. It is not a hunger. Like, it's not like hunger or thirst that like our body needs it and therefore craves it. Our body only craves sex if we feel rewarded from sex, right? So think about it this way. If you don't eat, you will feel hunger no matter what. And you will feel hunger for whatever food. If you don't eat for a full day and somebody hands you something that you don't even really like to eat, you will still eat it because you feel hunger. Now, think about an amazing piece of chocolate cake that is delicious. You're gonna crave that chocolate cake even if you're not hungry, right? Because you're very rewarded by that chocolate cake. That is kind of like sex. So sex, you're going to crave sex if you are rewarded by sex. So if you're having sex that is not enjoyable and not pleasurable, it's going to be very hard to increase your desire for that. We desire things that we enjoy and that we like. So, right, if you really hate cauliflower crust pizza, it's going to be really hard to increase your desire for cauliflower crust pizza because you don't get rewarded from eating cauliflower crust pizza. Like, your dopamine levels don't get rewarded. Maybe you get rewarded because it's less carbs and things like that. But when it comes to sex, we need to make sure that we're having sex that we actually look forward to, right? So we need to figure out how to make sex pleasurable. We need to spend enough time in foreplay. We need to make sure that sex is not painful, okay? We need to address any kind of pain. We need to make sure we're using enough lube. Ladies, it's okay to use lube. Please use lube. You probably need to use lube. It is so normal to need to use lube, okay? It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. Your body is not broken if you need to use lube. Please use lube. And I recommend almond or jojoba oil. Those are excellent oils to use as lube. If we're looking at trying to navigate this difference in desire, one of the things that I want to recommend to you is create a menu of intimacy items that you can do. Everything from G-rated, just getting together, building non-sexual intimacy, right? So talking together, having a glass of wine together, playing a board game, dreaming together, making plans, those kind of things, right? Those are intimate activities. All the way to showering together, different foreplay things, and different positions in sex, right? I want you to create a menu of items that help you and your spouse build intimacy. Because sex is not intimacy. Sex does not equal intimacy. Now, if you follow me over on Instagram, you see me use the word intimacy for sex all the time. And that is simply because the algorithm does not like the word sex. Okay. But sex does not equal intimacy. Intimacy is so much more than sex. And so when one of you is desiring sex, what you're really desiring is closeness when you're desiring sex. You are truly desiring to unite, right? But it feels like a desire specifically for sex because your brain really is looking for that reward system that comes from sex. And that reward system is pleasure. And God created such a beautiful reward system because sex is so good and he wants us to have sex. And so he built our brains to work that way, that we want something that is enjoyable, and sex is enjoyable. And because sex is so good, like God created sex to be enjoyable because he wants us to have lots of sex. But if sex isn't enjoyable for you yet, then you probably don't want very much of it. So I want you to have this menu of things that you guys like to do together, like all across the board, right? From just playing Mario Kart together, having a glass of wine, like simple things, all the way to the bedroom things that you like to do. So this list is things that you guys both like to do together that help you feel connected, right? So that's going to look different for every relationship. But having this menu of items to choose from is going to be incredibly helpful for my next recommendation. Now, you have heard me talk about on the podcast that it's important to schedule sex. I want to go one step further. I want you to schedule intimacy. And recall, just like 3 minutes ago in the podcast, I talked about how sex does not equal intimacy. So I want you to schedule a minimum, absolute minimum of 2 intimate times per week. 2 of them. This does not mean that you need to have sex both of those times. In fact, I think a lot of times it won't necessarily mean that. This is time to build intimacy. You've got your whole menu of things to choose from. And these are things that build your intimacy. Yes, on the menu is sex. On the menu is things like sensual massage and showering together and, whatever kind of activities you like to do in that realm. But also on the list is things like reading the Bible together, doing a Bible study, maybe reading one of John Paul II's audiences from Theology of the Body and discussing it. Maybe playing board games, sitting down with a glass of wine, making plans, planning a vacation, like things that build intimacy. And you're going to have at least two of these dates per week, and like schedule the evenings that you're going to do it or the early mornings or whatever. And this way, whether or not you're trying to avoid pregnancy or have to abstain for some amount of time, you are ensuring that your relationship is always growing in intimacy. And that is only going to help your relationship. Growing in intimacy is only going to help it. And then what that does is it also allows you to be setting aside time that would be absolutely appropriate time to have sex, right? So we're planning ahead, we're leaving that time available, but there's no pressure to be having sex during these intimate times. But we're able to fill each other's cup by building that intimacy and making that time enjoyable. So in conclusion, we got to figure out if you have responsive or spontaneous desire, because that is going to solve a lot of libido mismatch issues. The next thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that sex is actually something you enjoy. We need to make sure there's plenty of foreplay. We need to make sure there's like manual or oral stimulation for you, ladies, to make sure that you're actually receiving that stimulation to the clitoral head and the entire clitoral structure so that blood is actually flowing down there so that you can actually receive an orgasm, because penetration is not the most pleasurable thing for women. It's usually manual stimulation that is one of the most pleasurable things, especially if there's manual stimulation right around the clitoral head. So we got to make sure that there's plenty of that going on when you guys have sex. We got to make sure there's no pain. We got to make sure we're well lubricated, right? And then we're going to really build the intimacy in our relationship. And we're going to build it both inside and outside of the bedroom. And this is going to help your desire mismatch. Thanks so much for listening. If you have ever gotten any value from this podcast, could you do me a favor really quick? Go into the podcast app that you are listening in. And if it gives you an option to rate and review, please rate and review this podcast. It helps us so much in reaching new listeners and spreading the word about this podcast. Thanks so much for listening.